Hey friends, it's Laura. Welcome to TMST. Even before the pandemic, but especially during and after, how many times have you said, I'm so burnt out? We all kind of have this general idea of what it's like to be exhausted and at the end of our rope and fried and so on, and we kind of lump that into burnout. But did you know that burnout is a thing that's actually defined as a workplace-centered phenomenon, and it's studied and measured by the WHO, the World Health Organization? I didn't know that. They have discerned a model for identifying burnout and the impact of burnout, which is pretty devastating. As we know, one of the ways we get power over an issue or a problem is to name it as an actual thing and put shape and definition around it. That's part of what we're doing in today's episode. Today's guest, Jennifer Moss, has dedicated a large part of her career to researching, writing about, and educating people on burnout. She is going to get us on the same page so we can understand exactly what it is, how it's measured, and what the real world impacts of it are. Jennifer is a journalist, a former startup founder, and a brilliant thinker on how our workplaces and really our society is failing us. Her book, The Burnout Epidemic, is an excellent deep dive into this topic. Like so many of us, she came to this topic through her own experience of burning out. I know we walk around too often going on about how fried we are, or sometimes make that a badge of honor, but this is really serious stuff. The WHO calculates that there are 750,000 deaths per year traceable to overwork. We have to do better. Even with this subject matter, I think you're going to find this conversation with Jennifer Moss encouraging. I know I did. All right, here you go. Hey, Jennifer, I'm so happy to have you here.
I'm really looking forward to this. It's going to be great.
I want to have you kind of introduce yourself and just talk about what you do and how you got into this work and how you got to focus on burnout. It's such an interesting, juicy topic.
It is, and I would have never thought, starting to write this book in 2019, that the pandemic would have unfortunately been a boost to my career. I feel like Anthony Fauci and I are the only ones that are shocked by how that impacted us over the last couple of years. But
Right.
I had a really circuitous path. Wanted to be a journalist. Started out as a journalist. Went to school for it, and but then got into corporate communications, sort of the other flip side of the sort of the goal. I think I've always been really curious, and so that led me into journalism. And then, kind of through the process of working in corporate communications and in HR services, interestingly, an HR services company, a big one in California, it sort of taught me about the research side and how much I love this kind of combination of learning about what's happening in the industry, learning what's happening across the world, and how it's affecting workplace, how it's affecting the place where we spend so much of our time. But it wasn't until 2009 when my husband, who was a pro athlete, got really sick. He became acutely paralyzed, and through this West Nile and Guillain-Barré and all these really terrifying illnesses, that our whole world changed. It turned on its, kind of on its side. And we moved back to Canada, and that sort of led us to really understanding psychological fitness and, and social emotional intelligence, and, why we study athletes so much, and understanding why they develop some of these really, high level of social emotional skills. And a lot of it is resiliency and dealing with loss and having to work as a team. And that led me to really think about how to contribute that to the workforce. But it was my own burnout as the founder of a tech company that played into why I wanted to start to write about it and understand it. But it was also that I was spending so much time with these companies, giving them strategy on, building a more fit workforce, and realizing that we were really failing. And I kind of felt like a fraud, in that this was about telling, your staff to be psychologically fit and improve their social emotional intelligence, improve their resiliency, but you're still overworking them and you still have discriminatory behavior and there's no inclusion and you're disproportionately impacting women. And, all these things were happening that I came to understand that there was a way bigger problem at hand.
Around when did you start to feel like you were a fraud?
Well, so I was the co-founder of this startup. It was called Plasticity Labs, and the concept was based on the neurosciences of happiness and this idea that it's about intentional, slow process of building hygiene and habits that become kind of who you are, right? And
Mm-hmm.
conscious and culture being the same. And so I think what I came to understand is that there's a place for this. This is really important for us to still optimize, and self-care is really important. And we need to, as leaders, model behavior of self-care, or else, and then we're just constantly creating invisible pressures for people. So it's still necessary. But the way that we were tackling it, we were looking at it from a technology approach, like how do we measure happiness and then create interventions and, build it in that way. And that we tried, and that wasn't working exactly because, again, technology can't solve for everything. And we were looking for this sort of solution that we realized we needed like 100 components to create a product that would actually solve for it. And one of the biggest failures was that we had to make sure leaders were walking the walk. And what we were only really doing was communicating to employees about how they could, as individuals, manage their own burnout. And it really was in 2019 when the World Health Organization finally identified burnout as institutional workplace stress left unmanaged, when it was actually, defined as this occupational phenomena. And it was based on their joint research with the International Labor Organization that found that 750,000 people die per year of overwork, that it's like really catastrophic. That I went, okay, this is not just a whiny millennial problem that was, reported in the New Yorker, like, that
Right.
there's just people wanting more work-life balance, or millennials and Gen Zs are lazy. Like, that wasn't what it was. It was really that there's catastrophic impacts. And so I was like, I can't just keep telling people to manage, their own burnout through self-care, or handle chronic stress through self-care, or that they're just not committed, to their work, or we need to infuse more passion and that's going to solve for the systemic discrimination, or here's a technology solution, listen to rain for 15 seconds and that's going to, really make it so that there's better, care and paternity and maternity leaves. I mean, like, we're using the wrong instrument.
Yeah.
And that really changed for me.
I didn't realize that it wasn't until 2019 that this was like a recognized phenomena. That blows my mind because, and it also doesn't, given our culture. So, can you talk about the definition? I was surprised that it is specific to workplace. It doesn't include all areas of life. Why is that? Why is it specific to work? And how is that helpful? Is it also limiting?
There's a reason why it took till 2019 to come up with the definition. And a lot of it was that there was contention around, burnout already has this sort of ill-defined nebulous brand, and people don't treat it seriously. And so therefore, if we label it as serious, and we try to reduce stigma by making it so clarified and make burnout specific to this one area, is that going to be beneficial, or like you said, will it inhibit, it from being, realized and taken seriously across organizations? Because we kind of have made burnout seem like, that it's not really important. And because it's been ill-defined, people have taken on a whole bunch of different definitions. But it was Dr. Maslock and Dr. Michael Leiter and Susan Jackson who, over the last 40 years, have really been pushing for this very specific definition so that we can start to move the needle and make more accountability for organizations, and try to make sure that, even if it takes 20 or 30 years, that we start to delineate it at work. There's policies that are built around it. There's strategies that we can start to follow. There's standards and guidelines. There's laws. And if we don't make this choice now, we won't ever then make it something that we're working on in a very, serious strategic way. And so
Yeah.
that's why, and we still have lots of arguments around it. People come in and say, how do I describe my family burnout then? How do I describe burnout in my life? Because I do feel burnout in my life. And I don't think in 2019, they would have expected the pandemic where, 4% of the global workforce was working remote. And then in a week, it was 35%. I mean, that's a massive paradigm shifting moment. So we've got more integration into work and life. And so there's some things that I think need to be addressed within that construct. And it's why they started to label it sort of more broadly as institutional stress, because you can feel burnout in school and in, academia and other places. But they've made a point to say it's not life. We need to find another word for the life stress. So that we can go on this path to make sure that we are really focusing now in the next century on changing the way we think about burnout and making it, making people understand that there are catastrophic consequences to mislabeling it.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. I'll just read it so folks can ground themselves in that definition. The WHO has defined burnout as a syndrome conceptualized as resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been sufficiently managed. And it's characterized by 3 dimensions: feelings of energy depletion or exhaustion, increased mental distance from one's job, and third, feelings of negativism or cynicism related to one's job and reduced professional efficacy. And this is an important emphasis that burnout refers specifically to phenomena in the occupational context and should not be applied to describe experiences in other areas of life. So that's where we're grounding it. And then the research shows that burnout has 6 main causes. So I'm going to read these 2 and then ask you some questions. So the first is unsustainable workload. Everyone understands that. I think everyone feels that. 2, perceived lack of control. 3rd, insufficient rewards for efforts. 4, lack of supportive community. And that's referring to one's whole life. Is that right?
No, this is lack of community inside the workplace. And if you go through them, I can go back and sort of like give a little description.
Yeah, so let's do that.
Yeah.
Lack of fairness and then mismatched values and skills. So unsustainable workload, what would you want to comment on that?
Well, that one's pretty self-explanatory. That's for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the leading cause of burnout. It was pre-pandemic. It is even more so now. We're seeing an increase in workload more than ever in the pandemic. We were working about 3 more hours per day, about 30% more.
That's a lot.
It's a lot. And we were already working unsustainably before. And we're finding that, Jeffrey Pfeffer wrote a really great book, Dying for a Paycheck. And he wrote that overwork and actually the sort of the medical illness or impact when we are overworking is the 5th leading cause of death in the US too. I mean, when you look at the symptoms of the impact of overwork, it's just unbelievable. It's leading to heart disease and stroke. And so it's a very serious issue and it's increasing. We've also seen, just Microsoft Trends data. They said Teams meetings alone in the last year. So we're not talking about Zoom, Google Meet, like this is just Teams meetings increased by 252% more meetings in this last year, which, I mean, meeting fatigue was always a problem. And then now we've got more. So we're just working unsustainably more hours. And so that overwork piece is obviously a big threat. I think the fact that there's 6 root causes, we only, and often only think about overwork as the leading cause, but there's these other pieces, and the lack of agency one is just what we're seeing right now is that lack of right to disconnect, where you're getting emails at 11 o'clock expected to have an answer by the next morning, or we have this huge attrition problem because of the Great Resignation, and you're all of a sudden handling 4 jobs at the same time, or
Right.
you're being micromanaged. We saw a lot of increased micromanagement in the pandemic because managers are used to walking around and seeing you, and it's kind of like, oh, if I can see you, you're probably working, whether you're playing Tetris on your phone behind your computer. It's like, I can see you,
Right.
you're working. So this whole idea of remote work has made people feel like they have to control more. We've seen an increase in bossware where people are watching you while you're working. So we have that lack of agency has played a big role, and even just lack of autonomy in how you reach your goals. I mean, often managers will say, I want you to accomplish this goal, but then they follow you along in the process instead of just saying, hey, get there as you get there. I don't care about your process. I'm just happy that you're going to get there in the way you want to. And then, so that lack of autonomy and boredom is playing a big role in people's feeling of burnout. The lack of, and I'm not going to go in any particular order, but like lack of fairness is a big piece that was something that came out of this last year, that disproportionate impact on women and women of color and single mothers. You had, people already, in the family, it was mostly women that were taking on that role. And then in the pandemic, they went from about 4 or 5 hours of unpaid labor, typically on average per week, to 20. And so we lost, we still have about 1.8 million women that are not in the workforce. So we need to get that many back that were before. We lost 3 million, and then we gained back, 1.2, but we're still missing 1.8 million from the workforce. They might not return. So that's 30 years ago that we were at those same female labor force participation. So that was impactful. When we look at lack of community, that can mean we're feeling isolated and lonely, which we're seeing a lot in remote workers right now, kind of feeling disconnected from their groups. It can also mean that they feel like othered or excluded inside of their workplaces. There's examples, and in the wellness space where I wrote in the book, these fit challenges, and I interviewed a lot of people that said, I was excluded because I have mobility issues, and all these things that we think are good intentions, and we see that othering, that is lack of community, where you don't feel part of the group. We also see that mismatch values and skills that I was telling you that you mentioned, but where we feel lately that we really loved our job, like we were really in this, we're connected to the mission. You see this with a lot of nurses and teachers and physicians, and even people in impact roles like nonprofits, even senior executives, where they loved going into the office and being with people. That's part of what they loved about their jobs. They just feel sort of distanced from that. They're not feeling recognized or rewarded for the work. So that's a big part of it. Lack of pay and recognition. Again, that piece, its pay is important, yes, but we're finding it's less important. It's more about just feeling like I am valued, that I'm doing, really good work. That's the crux of those root causes. And so understanding, I think, where you might fit, you might be checking off 3, or you might have like one of those things. I think that really helps you understand, how burnt out I am and how many causes are affecting me in my role.
So I have to believe there are a lot of people that maybe hear that list and think, well, that's just work. Like, that's just how work is. The pandemic obviously sharpened people's awareness of what was going on. But is this a new issue? Or has it just creeped and become worse and worse and worse? Or has it always been bad? When did this really start and take root?
I think it's always been around. I wrote in the book, and I kind of joke, even, the Egyptians, you had the workers, about a half their lifespan of those that, didn't work, that were of the aristocratic, group. So, or the sort of the kings and queens and the gods. So it's, I think when it comes to work, there's always been people that have been forced to do extra versus those who don't. But I would say that, we've had this relationship with work that's really changed. It was transactional. You knew what to expect. When technology came in, though, it really did blow up that relationship. It was no longer transactional because work was in your home now, and work was, it was infiltrating that life piece. There wasn't the same way of connecting with a factory worker, for example, outside of work, or anyone really, unless you could call them. I guess there was some folks maybe in sales that were still on calls or faxing.
Right.
It wasn't that speed of connection that technology really then abruptly changed the way that we work and live. And then our contract went from transactional to a social contract that was different with work. And when that happened, we started to, expect more, but it wasn't until we were really pushed. And the pandemic did push people to a limit. And I think there's a bit of a revolution now. And now we're post pandemic and people are quietly quitting or they're resigning and they're saying, okay, I'm at my limit. And so their behavior is saying, okay, that social contract with work is not the kind that I want. And I don't necessarily want this future because I've been exposed to my own mortality in the last 2.5 years and my
Yeah.
priorities have changed. And so I don't want that thing that you say is the carrot. That carrot doesn't matter to me anymore. And that is really disrupting our workforce right now.
When you say social contracts, I know what you mean, but can you explain that? So what does the social contract of work say?
Well, I mean, it varies between what organizations and leaders want it to be versus what we expect it to be, but it's kind of the defined and the non-defined relationship that we have with our work and the expectations. And so what we're seeing right now is that people were working often in the non-defined places of that social contract, that relationship with work where it became, here is what we're expected to do. And then there's the above and beyond, expectation, which varies between teams and groups and managers, and whether a manager is really protective of your work-life balance or someone who is not protective of that. So going above and beyond could mean for some, answering those emails, connecting with clients, being on call basically 24/7, and it also varies by culture, the social contract with work in Japan versus what the social contract looks like, in Sweden. I mean, very different, and in North America. But we have now said, and here is why I've had this real issue with this title of quiet quitting, is that if you want someone to work whatever it is that you want them to work above and beyond, you need to define what above and beyond looks like and say, if someone's working to sort of the letter of their law, the sort of the construct of what you defined as their job, you have to
Yeah.
let them know what it means so that they can do the extra and that becomes their job. Stop having people duke it out for, for a promotion or a raise or acknowledgement, especially when it's very one-sided and there's a pathway for only certain people to be able to get there. And when you're saying, okay, well, above and beyond means emails and responses at 8 o'clock at night, when disproportionately females are putting their kids to bed or they're in bath time or they've just finished lunches and made dinners and now they're exhausted. And you're saying, okay, well, after all of that extra work, you're supposed to be competing with someone who doesn't have any of those barriers to them being
Yeah.
successful. And so what we're seeing now is that was the expectation. And even though it was invisible, you still sort of followed what was around you, the culture of the type of people working around you. And so you followed the social contract of sort of the nebulous piece, that was ill-defined,
Yes.
like the culture. And now people are saying, well, I want that back. And I don't think that that's fair. And so people, when we say quietly quitting, they're not quitting. They're saying that I want to have a future that like includes living longer and being a good parent to my children, and, not working on weekends so I can go watch my kid play, baseball or whatever. I mean, how is that quitting, and you hear people too, like Ariana Huffington was just talking about how it's quitting on life. It's actually not quitting on life if you're quietly quitting. What you're saying is,
No.
you need to create an environment that includes my needs as a human being and what my, rights are. And you see, a lot of countries now creating these right to disconnect policies. Canada has just adopted it, that makes it unlawful to connect with someone after working hours. So it means better establishment of what the expectation is, what the contract is. And
Yeah.
then you're protected in those hours that are yours. And I think it's actually a really good revolution that's happening right now.
Yeah, I didn't realize that had just been passed in Canada. I can't imagine a universe where that would ever get passed in America. So this leads into this discussion of sort of the players that contribute to this and have a stake in this phenomenon, and can potentially influence where it goes. I want to talk about both employers and workers. But there are you just mentioned, that there's these other factors, the societal factors, the cultural factors. What would you say, if you could imagine where the change would be led from, if it's possible to answer that? Who is it? The employers? Is it the workers?
I've always said it's an ecosystem problem to solve. I mean, we can't develop learned helplessness because that's not even functional for our own lives. We have to still, especially as leaders, we need to model self-care. So we need legacy to change. Employees need to begin to trust. So it's a trust building that has to happen over time, where employees start to feel like, okay, I can participate in these offerings because you've given me now time, and I believe that you have my best interests at heart. So it's going to take a long time, and it does require, I think, leadership and organizations to start. They need to realize that they've created this mess and that they have pushed it on the individual for a long time, and that's been beneficial to them to say, too bad. Oh, you're not working above and beyond. I'm going to fire you. I mean, they have been able to leverage this for a really long time, and it's now time for them to say, okay, I'm going to start the process. And it's just really about talking about it, addressing it, making it open for people to talk about their workloads and have conversations with their boss, and their boss has to address it, and their boss's boss has to say, okay, maybe this growth strategy isn't sustainable with my current workforce. Maybe I have to make sure I have staffed up in certain groups to handle this next project that we want to take on. And realizing that, it isn't just about innovation at all costs or growth at all costs, and that there's a lot of companies that have made a lot of money, and it's frustrating that their shares might be down or that their profits might be down, but maybe that's okay for a period of time for them to be able to get resourced up, not break their workforce, because the cost of attrition, some companies I've worked with have turned over 50% of their teams. Like, they're 50% of their staff. I have one company that they hired 6,000 new people this last year, but they had to replace 3,000 of those people. So, I mean, there's a financial impact to that too. And if you're only looking at these top line numbers and you're not really actually looking at the consequences of that much attrition, it ends up kind of being, six half dozen the other. We need to be thinking, okay, to be sustainable and to be profitable long term, it means taking a pause. And so that's something that we need to think about. But government too, I mean, the right to disconnect policy is really important. You know that the US right now has no standards on psychosocial policies. Really, it's safety policies, and we have standards around that. But when it comes to psychological or psychosocial policies, there's very little. There's no standards really globally. Canada has really led the way there, as well as Australia. Both of them have worked really together to come up with real standards around psychosocial safety policies. But that needs to also change. So when you're looking at that part of it. It's government needs to play a role. And like, even like, words like paternity and maternity leave. We should have care leave. We should change the language around that. It shouldn't just be about whoever's birthing the child that has this different way of thinking about that person, which is very exclusive. And it makes paternity leave less, I don't know, less taken, which, and it's not reinforced, which then disproportionately impacts women in the long term. So these are very upstream policy, government invested strategies that need to pair with what leaders are doing. And then employees, I think, will get to a point where they built back the trust, and then they can participate in a way that's engaged, inspired, and they don't feel like quietly quitting because the strategy is there, where they don't feel so left out of the decision and left out of their lives.
Yeah. And because right now, I mean, there are a lot of companies that signal these wellness programs, and I'm sure some of them are real, but the trust you're talking about is like, I trust that I can actually do this. I can actually stop working at 5:00 and I'm not going to be penalized. I can trust that I can take my unlimited vacation. You can actually take a vacation and not
Yes.
work during your vacation. Right. So that's the kind of trust you're talking about, right? Like that they're heard, and also that the standards that are set and the strategy that is set is respected across the culture and the leaders.
That's exactly it. That's it. Like you stated it perfectly, and that's going to take a lot of time to rebuild that relationship, and legacy really has to change, because of what I see in a lot of organizations is leaders saying, okay, well, I'm going to tell you not to answer your email on the weekends on vacation, but I'm going to, because it's okay for me, but not okay for you. And then, people feel like, well, if you're doing it, then I probably should be, or I should be responding. And then the cycle continues.
Yeah, it's so tricky though, having been a leader and an owner of a company and an employee. The leaders are stuck too. They're not always sitting on high thinking,
No.
I'm going to do this I'm going to do this to my employees.
Right.
I'm going to, they're stuck too.
And they have
sucks.
stakeholders, and they're sandwiched. Often I did this talk throughout the pandemic, exhausted leaders leading exhausted teams. And, they're so exhausted. And I kept saying, like, we have to create this vulnerability to say where I'm at as a leader, that I'm trying, and that I've had 25, I'm the same age as you, 45. I've had 25 years of the expectation being always on. And so to kind of rewire my brain even to do that, I'm constantly trying to do that with my team, and, send later on emails. And, because I'm passionate about my work too, I have this threat of burning out because I don't know when to stop. And so there's all these things I have to really intentionally work at it. And so you're asking millions of managers and leaders across the globe, tens of millions, to completely rewire their habits and the way that they behave. And so it's this idea that we're going to be able to solve it, like I said, where I was a fraud, solve it with technology or solve it with some silver bullet solution. I mean, we haven't been able to in the US get paid family leave. I mean, when I had children there, I mean, you have a disability check that you get, which is so bizarre. I mean, it's so weird. And so these are the kind of things that are going to take, a long time to switch off. And there's a lot of other factors, political factors, and just so many other things that are creating barriers to solving this. So I think it has to be that we intentionally take a couple things, and leaders can do that really quickly. Like, what if I just do one thing differently for the next 6 months?
What is one thing, like maybe as an employer yourself, or a manager, a leader, owner, what is one thing? Like, if you had to just start from zero, what is one thing that you would do?
I'm a really big proponent of data. And that doesn't need to mean like an employee survey across the board. I always suggest a very specific one meeting a week, non-work related check-in, and asking people how they're doing. What is one thing that was like a, high of this week that was a professional high or a non-professional high, whatever it was, like something that just lit them up this week, and one stressor, and, share some of the things that are just really needling them or that are starting to frustrate them, because you find that the burnout happens with these tiny little pebbles that turn into boulders. They're the like gratiating things about work that you put aside, you put aside, you put aside. You're getting increasingly more and more frustrated. And then finally, it's just people are over it. And then you lose people. And so this non-work related check-in is just 30 minutes. It's supposed to be quick. You go around each other and then, find out what is the language of motivation for people. I always love like learning this thing that lit them up that week can be that they went to New York and they're a huge Broadway buff and they just watched, 3 days straight of all the shows that they could. And, or they talked about like we have TIFF going on right now, and it's all about like the movies that they're planning to see at the festival, and just, you hear about that. Or if they repeatedly talk about something that really excites them as a leader, you can say, okay, that's a motivating thing for them. How do I incorporate that maybe into projects or, or incentives or rewards? And then you can start to customize and personalize the way that you work with your teammates. And then the last one I think is really important. This third piece of the meeting should be, okay, what can we do, team, next week to make this a bit easier? What are some of those little tiny gnawing issues? How do we solve it for Mary? Like, she's really feeling frustrated by this thing that keeps happening, and she's feeling like she's running out of time on these projects. Like, what can we do to help with that? How do we, figure out a solution together? And as a team, you compassionately and empathetically solve problems week to week. And it's a very simple way of adjusting the conversation. And a lot of people have non-work related check-ins, but they're not functional. They don't have an outcome. You're just sort of talking, and sometimes it leads to complaining. So I always say, like, start off with like a stressor first, and then talk about what lights you up after, and then come up with solutions. So there's this practical, intentional aspect to the meeting, and people start to see over time. It's about consistency and frequency. So you never meet it. And then over time, it starts to build trust. And leaders have to get into the weeds too. They have to talk about their stressors and their vulnerabilities and their things that light them up too. And not be worried that it's going to make you less effective or, viewed as less strong or authoritative. That I think what we found, and we've done this intervention across lots of orgs, what we found is that people tend to really relate to their like supervisor or leader or manager at that point. And then leaders get really a lot better at just understanding what people's needs are and catching them in time, before they get to be the builders.
Yeah, because I thought one of the interesting things about the report that you provided was that just being able to talk about mental health was such a big factor in people's wellness, satisfaction with work. And if I think about it now, I work in a recovery space. And so we're always talking about mental health. It's very open. But in my prior lives, no, we never did that. So that's helpful. That's super helpful. And it's even helpful for me and my organization, because we, usually have the part of the weekly meeting where you just kind of catch up with each other. But that's like, oh God, we got to get through this so we can actually make the meeting, do the thing we're supposed to do at the meeting.
Right. And I think that that companies and even or some organizations do really well. You probably have that open space where people can communicate. And there are probably, 20% of companies and organizations and nonprofits and groups, even teams in hospitals and other places that all do this well. Like, the culture just works for them. But and that's great, but a lot of people don't know how to define it. They're just doing this naturally. And so we need to give the people the tools that don't necessarily do this naturally, like they're struggling, to be able to figure out, okay, well, how do I figure that out? Because, it's great for those folks. And I've had I've worked at companies where it's just there's juju, like it's just there's something in the air. We just all bond. It's really great. Like we love going into work. We're so into each other. And then I've been in places that are this polar opposite, and it's like, okay, what was the secret sauce over here? And you start to break it down. You realize it's just fundamentally really high trust and good friends, good relationships. Work is fun. There's levity. It's not
You like the
serious all
people.
the
Yeah.
time. Yeah, you like
Yeah.
the people that you're interacting with. It's same as school. If you go to school, we were talking about this earlier, but if you go to school and you have no friends, like it's really a sad place to be. I mean, work, we sort of have to get that back. And I actually had someone use this sort of description and described work lately as like going to school with no recess, no art, no gym. It's just like it's all work right now. And we've stopped having fun. We've stopped hanging out.
Hi, I'm Michael. I'm the executive producer of Tell Me Something True, and I co-created the show with Laura. We have one goal here: put something into the world that helps all of us figure out how we can have a better week. And we think that the best way to do that is to keep the pod ad-free so that all of the work goes toward making something that's useful for you instead of hustling to keep advertisers happy. And this is where you come in. TMST Plus is the membership program that helps to keep this show going. Whether it's through a monthly membership or a one-time contribution, TMST Plus members are super important because they help to pay for the show's production and distribution costs. It's pretty sweet, makes a difference, and you can make it happen with a one-time gift for as little as $5 or $10 or $20 a month. If your situation is such that becoming a member doesn't work, it's all good. We hope you enjoy the show, maybe share it with a friend or two, and we hope you check out the playlist that we put together every week on Spotify. Just search the playlists for Tell Me Something True. It's free, and we're thrilled that you're here. And if you could become a member, well, you can find the link in the show description. Head over to tmstpod.com. Takes less than 2 minutes. And thanks.
So workers, let's switch to that real quick. You've interviewed people who make the case that burnout is never the worker's fault, but um, it does have serious impacts on our physical and mental health. You spoke with someone who says that the key is getting what's called authentic rest as the most important step in the efforts to recharge. What is that? What is authentic rest?
It is a big component for workers. Again, the self-care piece is important for just us as individuals, and it's really important at work. Sleep is a big factor. I mean, like there's a lot of things that Ariana Huffington says that I agree with in the sleep, the mission she's been on around sleep is really important. I was just doing a commencement speech for a university yesterday, and I was noting that you have the difference between sleeping 8 hours as you're a student versus 6 hours is the difference of likelihood of graduation and higher GPA than those who sleep 6 hours or less. So there's like this real impact on performance. And so we need to start thinking about, and this has been something I've been sort of really pushing, is we have become toxically productive, this toxic productivity where now we don't commute. So now we just have to fill in the time. And, we always have to be doing things. I felt like at the beginning of the pandemic, I couldn't even barely get the dishes washed. And yet the people Marie Kondoing their kitchen. And, there was people baking bread every day with starter kits and learning 4 languages on Duolingo. And they're like pushing me, like, what are you doing with your extra time as you have 3 kids trying to like homeschool and write a book ironically, on burnout. So like that's what's sort of happened, I think, out of the pandemic too. We're in a state of urgency and emergency all the time, and we haven't let that slow down. And so we do.
It's so hard. It's so hard to let that slow down. Like, do you struggle with that? Because I do.
Well, look at me. Like, I'm even a person that like
You can't see her, people, but she's like,
I'm like boiling over all the time. So, yes, I have a real problem with that. I think personality type already, and then this last year, and just having to do more with less all the time, and also being really bad at like the job of teaching my kids. I was terrible at it. It was awful. It was not something I was good at. I never wanted to be a teacher ever. Like that wasn't when we played games. I played business. Like that was the CEO from like six. So I wasn't ever playing teacher. That was a thing that I really struggled with. But yeah, there's this toxic productivity, and we need to start looking at rest as actually being productive. We don't look at breaks. We look at that as a break from productivity instead of looking at it as being productive. And I want us to start changing the way we think about rest as actually this part of productivity. And instead of using your commute time to work more, use it as a way to, improve your brain capacity, improve your ability to make simple decisions, and make you less volatile when you're dealing with clients and staff. I mean, that actually makes you a more efficient and higher producing person if you look at rest as productivity. And we don't see that. We see that like as a break from it. And that really does need to change. We also, according to Dr. Dalton Smith, really interesting researcher, did a great TED talk, but also wrote a book. She talks about that we're in a global rest deficit and we're missing all of this rest, not just sleep, but we need creative rest. We need social and emotional rest. We need spiritual rest, which means we have to actually get out in nature to gain more spiritual rest. Like we need to get up, we need all of these different types of rest that are really part of how we are more productive. And instead we only look at it as sleep, which we barely get. And we never give ourselves times away from our devices. We don't give ourselves time to focus on our hobbies. We're not, as we're burning out, spending time with those people that give us, what positive psychologists call effortless state of belonging, that. And I love that term, the effortless state of belonging. And we have people in our lives that give us that. But when we're working really hard, we tend to we know that there's loyalty there. We know that we have a history. So we just put those people off, knowing that when we have time, we'll bring them back in. And it's like, those are the people that actually fuel us. Like if we need them more than ever right now in this situation that we're in where we're exhausted, we need people that feel like putting on the comfiest pair of track pants and being yourself. And one of the things that's happened too is that we're staring at ourselves so much in the mirror. We have this digital exhaustion. Actually, Botox amazingly calls this the Zoom boom. Botox has gone up 90%. Their sales increased 90%.
I'm not surprised because as I'm looking at you, I'm like, oh, there's the ditch in my forehead.
No, and I'm looking at how red my face is. I'm like, why do I look like I'm sunburned? It's just. But
yeah, we're not made to look in the mirror for 8 hours a day. Like no one wants that.
You're this self-criticism. So now we have a Zoom boom, or from in Botox. I mean, there's just all these things, these sort of freakonomic trickle down impacts that really should be telling us a lot about our behaviors that we need to pause and readjust. I mean, we need to readjust why is Botox saying this is Zoom boom? That's a problem. Maybe we should reassess how much time we're looking at ourselves and getting the rest we need and getting these breaks and looking them as productive, recharging instead of breaks. All of this language that we could be using to change the narrative around our own self-care, I think is really critical.
I think the thing that comes up for me around that is when you are, it's this catch-22 because when you get, as I have, so much validation and identity and reward from productivity and what you put out and success and achievement, rest actually doesn't feel good at first or for a while. Like, first of all, if you can even remember how to rest.
Yes.
I
It's
have
hard.
struggled with that. Like, I don't, what do I even do? What does rest actually mean? Am I just staring at the wall? Am I laying on the couch? Does reading a book count as rest? I mean, I know it's different for everybody, but there, I think people genuinely struggle with, what does rest even mean? If I'm running errands, is that rest because I'm taking care of things? Is it traveling? Well, traveling's stressful because like, there's so
Totally.
much, we've like bled the joy out of so many things that we don't even know how to access it. And it's like this muscle that you have to rebuild. And like any rebuilding of any muscle, it's not comfortable. It doesn't actually feel good for a while.
I love that you're describing it like that, because that's how most people feel. And I get like that too. It's intentional. I really have to create a focus, and it's hard and it's frustrating that I'm working so hard. I'm almost tired because I'm resting, and it doesn't, it's because of the state of urgency. The fact also that we have to recognize is that we've had our brains in fight or flight and surge capacity for a very long time, and it's not even really over. There's still a lot of societal and social unrest. There's triggers in our day-to-day lives that are making us feel anxious, and we've also just depleted our capacity. Our brains are very tired, and so what happens is it's looking for excuses to not be thinking about what's going on in the brain. And so it's looking for stimulus like our laptops, like our phones. It wants to kind of scratch the itch. And we've stopped being curious about things that give us pleasure. And so there's this perceptual curiosity, which is what we tend to really focus on. And that's and it actually is described sort of in the neuroscience, and this is not in a medical definition, but it's like scratching an itch that can't actually be scratched. Like, for example, a lot of us inside of the pandemic were constantly looking for new information about COVID. And even though it wouldn't change from day to day or it just got worse, we'd be 3 times a day checking the news or watching the news. It was the background music of our lives. We were doomsday scrolling, and there's social media stuff where all of a sudden you're in this huge time suck on TikTok because you just don't want to, think, or Instagram or Twitter, wherever you are, that you're sort of in this place. But it's because you want to seek information, you want to feel better about that information, and that never actually is it doesn't give us the feedback. But when we do things like wander around a park or wander through an art gallery, or we have what I call a frivolous 15, where it is like where you actually set a timer to give yourself 15 minutes where you can feel, no guilt, or you can stare at a wall, or like we almost need timed space in the beginning because that makes us feel like we're off the hook of expectation on us, like creating these primes in our brains so that we can commit to it, or setting again a prime in our brain to say at 1:00 every single day is my frivolous 15. And your body starts to produce hormones and chemistry that actually gets you to relax. Once it starts to trust, it takes like a month or longer. But if you set a patterned response every single day at the same time, and at first it's tricky, but then over, a month or two or whatever, once it becomes habit, you start to, produce these resting hormones before you start to take your break. You have 15 minutes that's timed, and then that sort of translates after. But what I've heard people say is that they sort of started to extend it. Like they let the timer go for 17, and then they let the timer for 20. And so it's like rebuilding a habit and giving yourself time to not feel guilty and be off the hook from it, knowing that when the timer goes off, you can get right back into the zone, and that's what the expectation is, but you're taking this guilt-free time and intentionally solving this problem. But it's work. It's like anything else. It takes a lot of work and intention, and it's frustrating, that it takes work because we should just be able to, rest. But doing what you're doing too and taking time off.
I'm so glad you said all of that, because I think a lot of times, we can make ourselves wrong for everything, right? And that's part of it. Like, I don't even know how to rest anymore. This isn't restful. It should feel like this. And then we're just caught. Yeah, I'm a terrible person. I can't even rest. I'm no fun. Yeah. Yeah. That's super helpful. So I want to respect time and we'll bring this to a close. There was this percentage in the research that 22% of people who said their well-being did improve over the pandemic, and the biggest factor being better balance and boundaries and the benefits of no commute.
Mhm.
Can you just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. And I think, me being a happiness expert and then an unhappiness expert, I've come to realize that the goal is always the same. It's okay just I'm starting a little further upstream. I'm not coming at it for the people that are already feeling good. I'm coming at it from a little bit earlier, but the goal is eventually where people feel good. And I think I actually see a lot of optimism and hope out of what we've gone through. And I think that one of the most incredible skills that we've built is this gratitude and this social emotional flexibility and this sort of cognitive optimism. And we don't realize we've built it, so we need to actually acknowledge it and label it, because a lot of us have. And part of that is that, when you go through this process of having to be flexible, when you have been forced to be resilient, your brain actually starts to predict that future stress will be easier to handle because we now have a frame of reference. And so we start to think differently about challenges and we're more hopeful about it. We've also learned to focus on what we have versus what we don't have. I mean, you look at the science of gratitude, and that's really what it is. It's about saying that two things can be true at the same time. And I'm a big proponent of, and you're probably familiar with this, but dialectical behavioral therapy, and this idea of like this idea that you can have two things be true at the same time. And the one of them is that was I tired? Was I tired and exhausted from my family? Yeah. There were periods of time where I felt really burned out, from my family. And yet I wasn't traveling as much. We were eating dinner together more. We were connected. And what we found is that there's a percentage of people, about 20% of the global population, that will experience post-traumatic growth out of moments like these, where they will actually increase their happiness set point because they see this as a learning, as a difficult and very stressful time, and there's trauma for some and grief, and all of those feelings can be true at the same time as, well, we also developed this appreciation for our lives in a different way. We kind of got down to the basics. Maslow's theories is that you when you get down to those survival skills, like everything else seems just like a cherry on top of the cake of life, right? And so there is a certain percentage of people that will immediately reframe, that are just kind of dandelions in a sea of orchids, and they just know how to kind of to think like that. And so there is that group that are going to be like that. But I think if we are better at labeling, like, what are some of the things that we would have never had if it wasn't for the pandemic, and take that forward and apply that, then it doesn't mean that the trauma, the grief, the pain didn't happen. It means we're choosing to bring a new narrative forward that might serve us better and, serve the people around us a bit better.
Yeah, and you really have to do it consciously, because we have the hedonic set point. You just
Yes.
you get used to whatever is around, and you get used to the sort of base level. What was familiar becomes normal. So it's like, oh, I have it good. You can be grateful and experience all that gratitude. And then 6 months later, it's just what's normal, and you're like, find new ways to be miserable. so
Exactly.
you really do have to remind yourself of this. I do.
Lucy Hone out of Australia, you might be familiar with her, but she did that TED Talk on resiliency. And she talks about resiliency, and she was a researcher. And then her daughter died with her best friend, and it was horrifying. It was just a really difficult thing. And all of a sudden, she was being resilient for real. And she gave some really good understanding from an academic side, but also from her research and stuff. But she realized that she threw a lot of that stuff in the air and came to understand what it really is like to reframe what that means to pull things that are even the most tragic experiences and change the dynamic of it. And I think we need to look at, that everyone has their own experience of pain and grief. And, it varies from one tragic event to maybe what others might not interpret as tragic, but all of our feelings are, valid. And recognizing that we can see, even in the worst situations, opportunities to do something better, or we're wasting a crisis. And I keep saying, like, we can't waste this crisis, or then there was no point to any of it. And I can't, as a human being, that's not my nature. Maybe I'm overly hopeful or rationally optimistic. I don't know, but I do think that I don't want to waste this, I want it to be, there needs to be a reason for it. And then we have to do the work to make there be a reason for this.
Thank you for being with us today. If you want more TMST, head on over to tmstpod.com and become a member. Members get access to the full uncut versions of these conversations, opportunities to submit questions for AMAs, and invites to join me for members-only events. We decided from the beginning to make this an independent project. We don't have sponsors and we don't run ads. This means we can make the show all about you and not what our sponsors or advertisers want. But it also means we're 100% reliant on you for support. So my request and my invitation is simple. Support the show by becoming a member. You can do this for as little as $5 a month. I cannot stress this enough. You could make a huge difference for as little as $5. Please head on over to tmstpod.com right now. Tell Me Something True is engineered and mixed by Paul Chufo. Michael Elsesser and I dreamed up this show, and we're looking forward to joining you online and next time on Tell Me Something True.